How's it going, YouTube? I got some video clips related to the Russo-Ukrainian War I want to show you. I think you're really going to like these. And if you like old tanks, I got some really cool clips of some old Soviet tanks that you're really going to love. But first, this is an exclusive clip you won't see anywhere else. So a guy I know has been living in Lviv until very recently. He's not a citizen of Ukraine, but he was working in Lviv. He just left very recently, and he went from Lviv to Jesno, Poland, and then flew out of the airport there. Well, normally this is a big tourist airport, but now they have what appears to be American Patriot missile batteries sitting out in the open.
At the Rzeszów airport. Those are anti-aircraft rockets. Airport here. Wow.
Now his take on this was that having these Patriot missile batteries out in the open was basically theatrical. That there's not a real threat. If Russia bombs this airport, it's going to be instant World War III. Now, as a side note, the Saudis have been buying all kinds of Patriot missile batteries to defeat Iranian-made drones and cruise missiles, and the Saudis are claiming that they don't even work. Of course, that could be pure user error. The Saudis are struggling to fight North Yemen Shiites who don't even own real shoes. Now, here's a video I came across. That vehicle you see has a very distinctive Ukrainian paint job. It's definitely Ukrainian. Those are definitely launch tubes. This is almost certainly an S-300 launcher for surface-to-air missiles. And then you've got a Russian soldier with a light machine gun who looks like he's about to shoot this at point-blank range. And I say to myself, surely this guy is not actually going to shoot this at this range. And surely someone's not going to stand there and videotape it at this range.
Готов?
Готов.
Огонь.
Now, my guess is that there are no Ukrainian soldiers within the same distance of this vehicle as the shooter and the cameraman. The only people who were probably injured were the two Russians, especially the cameraman. I mean, I honestly don't see how the cameraman was not injured. Look at this in slow motion. All right, let's look at this one more time, but with music.
Готов?
Готов.
This next video is at the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. And so those are anti-personnel mines. There's a smashed up road. This shows how Ukraine is fortifying the border. Now, of course, Belarus is being very ambiguous. Belarus actually doesn't have a very big military, but the threat of an invasion from Belarus is enough to occupy a lot of Ukrainian soldiers. Now, this is Lysychansk in Lugansk Oblast. And there's a World War II memorial here with a T-34 tank on display. It's a really nice memorial. So first you got, the plaque and everything here. And then you've got an actual T-34 tank. I believe this is a T-34-85 because of the barrel. So this is an upgraded cannon. Very nice pedestal here. Very elegant iconic tank that was simple and easy to mass produce. And during the 1939 Winter War, the Soviet invasion of Karelia in Finland, the Soviets kept this a secret. They only used really crappy BT series tanks and some other really crappy tanks. And the Germans got almost all the way to Moscow. And then suddenly they encountered huge numbers of T-34s and KV-1s that they did not even know existed. So this was like the Soviet Union's big success story, that they were able to keep this tank a secret. But so here's what happened. Someone dragged this tank off the pedestal and down the street. So here's some guys, I think they are Lugansk People's Republic Militia, and they're talking about how the tank was pulled off the pedestal and dragged down the street. And you can see it looks like some steps here were destroyed. I mean, that's very possible that this was all smashed up, dragging this tank off of here. But the tank was dragged down the street and then eventually abandoned. So here's the tank. Now, what did they think they were going to do with this? That's the mystery. So there's a few different options. Now, I thought long and hard about what could be the motive for dragging this tank off the pedestal and down the street. The really sad and lame explanation would be that some people were simply trying to steal this tank for scrap metal value. That would be the lame explanation. Now, I tried to think of what some practical explanations would be. And some Ukrainian soldiers may have thought that they could use this as a decoy tank. That's a real thing that's used in warfare, that people will put out fake tanks so the enemy will try to blow up a fake tank instead of the real tanks that they're actually using. So maybe that's what happened. Now, the Ukrainian soldiers were digging all kinds of trenches and fortifications in the city of Lysychansk. So maybe someone thought that they could drag this old T-34 into a ditch and, I don't know, put some sandbags on top of it and turn it into like a fortified machine gun nest or something. That sounds kind of plausible. Now, the absolutely crazy explanation is that some people thought they were going to actually start this tank up and use it. And I had posted this on the community section of this YouTube channel before, and I was informed of an absolutely unbelievable event that happened in 2014. In 2014, at the start of the Donbass War, there was an IS-3, a Joseph Stalin III tank, in a small city south of Kramatorsk on a pedestal at a World War II memorial, and separatists actually got the engine to run, started this tank, drove it off the pedestal, and drove it away. Now, these tanks were made between 1944 and 1953. Starting this after it's been sitting on a pedestal at a war memorial for decades is an absolutely insane story. And it questions everything I've ever heard about the Russian automotive industry. My whole life, I've heard that all Russian automotive ever made is of extremely poor quality. But they started it. And apparently, they eventually abandoned it. and it was retaken by the Ukrainian military. But the fact that they got this running is so insane. In America, there's places where there are tanks on display. I remember climbing on some tanks in Columbus, Ohio when I was a kid, but the barrels and any armaments are full of cement. Any openings are welded shut. I mean, a lot of effort is made to ensure that nothing about this tank is ever used again. But apparently that's not the case in Ukraine and Russia. In the 70s and 80s, huge amounts of old tanks were put on display in World War II memorials, but they didn't do anything to the tanks to actually decommission them. And so what someone was telling me is that in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, in Ukraine, drug addicts would climb into these tanks to shoot up heroin and then take a shit in the tank. And some of these tanks were full of needles and human feces and just a biohazard. Now, in the Lugansk cauldron, you've got the city of Lysychansk, the city of Severodonetsk, Borivska, Gorska, Zolote. There was all these major chaotic retreats. There's a number being passed around that Ukraine lost 300 pieces of heavy equipment. And I don't think this is an unrealistic number. And as a publicity stunt, in the city of Lysychansk, Russia put some captured intact pieces of armor on display, and they're lined up along one side of the street. There's about 30 items. Now, as you get to the very end, some of them have damage. So they kind of like add some damaged ones to the end, which is kind of funny. Then the other side of the street is tables displaying all the different kinds of NATO weapons and all the different kinds of drones and different kinds of Ukrainian uniforms and patches. Now, this is a publicity stunt, but to me it's very interesting because I like to see this kind of stuff. It shows all the different equipment and patches and everything that the Ukrainian army is using. Now, at the front of the line, they've got 5 tanks. I think they're all T-72s. Then there's several BMPs, different models. Some of these date back to the 60s. And then there's a bunch of domestic Ukrainian armored vehicles, the Varta and the Kozak. And then there's one British Saxon armored vehicle. Now, it's not in this lineup. There's 2 different videos being passed around of an American Humvee that was captured in Lysychansk. And it's Chechens from the Ahmed Tadyrov fighters who found it. and I guess they called finders keepers and already drove it away, so it's not in this lineup. There's a video of a Australian Outback armored vehicle that might have been from several Donetsk. It's not in this lineup, but essentially this lineup is a huge assortment of old Soviet armor and then some post-Soviet Ukrainian-made armor.
Без техники. Были случаи, когда они пытались прорываться колоннами, колонны уничтожались союзной артиллерией, войск Луганска, российских войск. Шансов вырваться большими колоннами у них не было. Поэтому бросали здесь, техника вся рабочая. На многих образцах техники уже нанесены тактические знаки Z. Они воюют так же, как воюют и образцы стрелкового вооружения. А вот, к примеру, британская бронированная машина Saxon AT-105A.
All right, check out my other recent video. I take you on a tour of South Carolina's swampland that hardly anyone even knows even exists. And click the like button, post a comment below, tell me what you think about this, and click the subscribe button. New video every few days.